Hello and welcome to Pluribus Unum's Fireside Chat. Not as good as a few hours, but hey, it's something. Happy spoopy! Yeah, it's gonna be the Halloween episode. The Fireside Chat of horror, I guess. Ooh, spoopy ghost! I have a pumpkin in the thumbnail, ooh! And the subject of this video is kind of scary, I guess. But before we get into that, let's get into the scariest thing of all. The news! Woo! First, we have an update coming from Argentina, because in between the last episode and this one, the Argentinian election happened, and a somewhat not shocking development happened. This is somewhat shocking, but also not really, kind of. You see, everybody knew that ᵖʰᵦᵃⁿ would make it to the second round, that there would probably be a runoff. The question really was who would make it to the runoff. Some people were saying Bullrich had a chance of going into the runoff, but I think literally right before the election happened, I posted a tweet saying Milei Massa, and it was like, boom, Massa ended up winning. And when I say win, I mean win. Like, he got the most votes in that round, which was pretty, I guess somewhat impressive, but not necessarily, because, there's a lot of ins and outs about, Peronism in Argentina. Some people were really expecting that he would not make it, that he wouldn't be in, because his party and, Peronism is not necessarily in at the moment, and he represents, the current government. But the fact of the matter is, Peronism and Kirchnerism, I guess, those two, ideologies are still really popular within a select group of people. And since Massa is the torchbearer for those ideologies, even if the latter one he doesn't even really want to be, those people are still going to turn out and vote for him, regardless if he wants them to. And as the luck of the draw would have it, Patricia Bullrich, she just was not popular enough to be a viable threat in this election. She got 1 million votes less than Milei, but again, since she represents the past, the past is obviously a place that they don't want to go back to. But the present, there are still people willing to fight for what is currently happening. But Milei, unfortunately, represents the idea of the future. There are some things that I did find interesting. For starters, here is the turnout of the initial round, the PASO. The vote total in the PASO was 24,016,776 votes. And that is of the over 34 million Argentinians that were eligible to vote. Even though voting is mandatory, I guess either the punishment isn't that severe, or you can just show up and just not vote. But come the general election, the amount of vote total was 27,100,675 votes, meaning people who probably sat out the initial round of voting were more inclined to vote for one of the candidates because of whatever reason. Whether it be they were scared of Massa, scared of Milei, scared of Bullrich, or maybe they were just super enthused to vote for ᵖᵉᵃⁿ. But it's this runoff that has people a little worried. I'll use the 2015 election as an example. We had a similar situation. We had a candidate of the Peronist coalition, Daniel Sciolli, a rightward candidate named Mauricio Macri. The elections were so similar, Massa was even a part of it. And in the first round, the Peronist managed to win, and people were enthused. But then come the second round, the runoff, it didn't really pan out because more people were not necessarily enthused to back the Peronist that time around. And many people were worried that the same situation could be happening with this one. Initially, people are we're so scared of Milei that we'll try to get the Peronist to win. But then it's did he reach his peak of the vote? And that's when things are going to get a bit more complicated, because let's just analyze the other three candidates. On one end, we have a Trotskyist, so if we're generous, they go to Massa, but realistically, they probably won't. Sciolli is also a Peronist, so he might actually end up going to Massa. Bullrich has already made it clear that she endorses Milei, But I wouldn't necessarily count all of her votes for ᵗᵉ. Like, for starters, let's just say this. Counting all of their votes for one candidate is already a ludicrous exercise. We acknowledge this. But just for a little fun, let's just look at it. Because this analysis, it can be good, at least in some capacity. We did the same kind of analysis in regards to the Brazilian election, and sure enough, that ended up leading into good results. So for starters, ᵖᵉᵃ and ᵗᵉᵃ are already giving Massa a pretty good total. But the problem is, Bullrich, third place, got over 6 million votes. That combined with ᵗᵉ, 7 million, would probably be very troubling for Massa. But I wouldn't necessarily count all of them for ᵗᵉ. Now, I know this might be me being a bit generous, but I think a decent number of Bullrich's supporters will probably end up voting for Massa because they're so afraid of what ᵗᵉ would do. At most, it'll be 60-40 to ᵗᵉ in regards to Bullrich's support. But then we also need to account for the people who didn't end up voting in this round either, or people who are just generally a bit confused and don't necessarily know who to believe. We still have a little bit of time left to see how this is panning out. But as of now, we actually do have some indications of what could be going on in the upcoming round, because in the immediate aftermath of Massa and ᵗᵉ, polls were conducted and released to show who is more popular. The first poll was conducted by CD Clarín, which had 41% of the vote going to ᵗᵉ and 40% of the vote going to Massa. Then, around the same time period, Projection also released a couple of polls. First one is 44.6 to 34.2 in favor of Massa. Next is 51.9 to 39.8 to Massa. Now we have Analogies, which also released a couple of polls. 42.4 to 34.3 in favor of Massa. 45.5 to 37% for Massa. It's still early. We have until the 19th to see how things can pan out. But given the fact that it isn't that much time period, there is a chance that Massa could pull this off. And that would be impressive. I'll genuinely say this. If Massa pulls this off, he would be a pretty good politician. Like, ᵗᵉ has been predicted to be the winner of this election for a long period of time. Like, to the point where when he was, people were saying that he was going to be the next president of Argentina. But if Massa pulls this off, it'll be a huge upset. And the fact that this isn't a easy path to victory has led to ᵗᵉ to get a little scared, to the point where an interview has been circulating around the media, especially on Twitter, that shows him a bit disoriented, which many people are perceiving as his mental health declining or whatever else. But one thing that I find fascinating is one thing that ᵗᵉ tried to do in order to drum up some support for the upcoming election. This is not only incredibly stupid, but it is also, stupid on way more levels than you even realize. Okay, so first I'm going to have to explain a meme from a country that I'm not a part of, from a language I don't speak, and try to explain it to you, because this is, really stupid. Okay, so during the, debates of the initial round, one of the most interesting things that happened during the night was ᵗᵉᵃⁿ and ᵖᵕᵉ getting into heated arguments with each other, as these two candidates could not be any further apart from each other if they tried, especially from ᵗᵉ's end, because ᵗᵉ has been heavily critical of people like feminists and socialists, leftists, and whatever else. Basically anybody who isn't a far-right ANCAP is part of his ire, which puts someone like ᵗᵉᵃ at the head of his ire list. However, there was a strange subsection of the internet that decided to interpret ᵗᵉᵃ and ᵗᵉ's arguing as flirtation, and had begun a shipping community claiming that these two were secretly in love, began writing fan fictions, drawing fan art, anything to have it seem like these two were in a romantic relationship. Now, that is stupid, but also not necessarily that stupid compared to things that we've seen on the internet. We have like the pole ball community, so this is like nothing really new. But what is interesting is that Milei, I guess, interpreted this as some sort of realistic thing, because he actually decided to try and get Bregman's support in the runoff, saying that he would try to appoint leftists in his cabinet if he were to be elected president of Argentina. A huge contrast from the fact that he has been extremely critical of the left and has made it a point that many of the cabinet positions would be gone because he wants to shrink the government so much. Unsurprisingly, they said no. So yeah, there's not much else I can say on that. Let's move on to another Latin American election. Mexico. We have some updates from Mexico, baby. And this is the biggest update of all, because it comes from the citizens movement, particularly Governor of Nuevo León. Oh, scratch that. Former Governor of Nuevo León, Samuel Garcia, who resigned from his position to request a license to run for president of Mexico under the citizens movement. Finally, the citizens movement is doing something. I've been sick and tired of the citizens movement doing that thing of like, oh, we might run a candidate and we might not run a candidate. But I'm genuinely happy that they are actually running a candidate this time. Not only because it gives me more coverage or stuff to do in the upcoming Mexican presidential video, but also because I genuinely like the idea of multiple candidates running, and not only also due to the fact that this might be detrimental to the opposition against the Juntos Hacemos Historia coalition. But yeah, this is genuinely interesting, and I really want to see how this pans out. There's really not much else I could say. Samuel Garcia, I've said some things about Samuel Garcia before, but the TLDR is basically yes, he is basically to the left of the most of the coalition, but at the end of the day, he's still a part of their bloc. He invited Elon Musk down to Mexico and was basically sucking him off. The dude, even though he claims I'm outside of the Mexican political establishment, he's basically that, just not officially in the club. Also, I just remembered another reason why this would be funny. Because it'd be a final fuck you to Marcelo Ebrard. Because he was trying to turn the citizens movement into his vehicle for president. And it looks like that might not even be happening. So yeah, Samuel Garcia, hope you'll win the MC nomination. Let's move on to the next story. It's technically two stories rolled into one, but it is interesting. And this is actually a good transition because one of these is foreign, one of these is local. So it's regarding the Israel-Palestine situation, but not just regarding the Israel-Palestine situation, regarding the electoral blackout or the electoral results or the electoral fallout from this event. Because, as we all know, Muslims are a voting bloc in many countries around the world. And in a lot of countries, they typically lean a specific way. And in the West, they typically lean to the left, or at the very least to the anti-right wing, because the right-wing parties in many countries, especially in the West, are not too enthused with Muslims. Two countries in particular are the UK and the USA. Muslim voters typically being a huge voting bloc in the Labour Party and in the Democratic Party, especially after 9/11, when the right wing basically demonized Muslims so much that literally the only vehicles they had left for any sort of political clout would be the left of center parties. I mean, take a look at the US. Go to the page that says Muslims elected to the United States Congress. Not that many people there, and all of them are blue. Now, some people were pointing out that the voting demographics had been changing a decent bit. While typically they were regarded as basically solidly in one camp, as the years go on, they do sort of shift a little bit in regards to their policies, especially as issues of Islamophobia and wars in the Middle East are not necessarily in the limelight in a lot of regards. One thing people point out is how some, in the AP exit polls, they did say that I think the number was 35% of Muslims backed Trump in the most recent presidential election. But that was because the Muslim ban was already struck down in the court, and Islamophobia was not really that big of an issue in that time period as compared to the 2016 election, when that was an extremely big issue. So they were able to vote a lot more in regards to their certain policies. And it's also a bit of an age thing. I wouldn't necessarily be surprised if we were to do some polling in regards to dividing the demographics and seeing that younger Muslims are more in line with the Democratic Party or further left in the Democratic Party than as opposed to older Muslims who feel like they more align with the socially conservative views of the GOP. But anyways, what am I talking about? Well, despite the fact that these two groups are considered very loyal to one party, the party's recent actions in regards to the Israel-Hamas war are a bit showing of changes. Let's look at this one from the UK, because the UK had the literal biggest shift in regards to the Israel-Palestine situation, position, in 2019, having their leader be a guy who was very much on the side of the Palestinian struggle. And as such, 71% of British Muslims voted for the Labour Party. Good on Corbyn for making sure that that voter base was very happy and very enthused with the issue. It's sad to see him go, but at the very least, we know the Labour Party is a lot more sympathetic to the Palestinian cause than, say, the Tories, so we know for a fact that really they can't do anything that bad to gauge that many people to leave. Well, Keir Starmer, being a neolib cuck, basically fucked that over for the Labour Party because, as this poll suggests, they asked British Muslims, if there was an election tomorrow, the thing that the British Labour Party keeps trying to do, they asked them, hey, if there was an election tomorrow, British Muslims, who would you vote for? 0.6% said they'd vote for the Tories. Okay, that's still good. 10% said they'd vote for the Lib Dems. 17% said they'd vote for the Greens. 21% would say they vote independent, and 40% said they wouldn't vote. Oh, I forgot Labour? Labour only gets 5% of the Muslim vote. How do you fuck up that bad? I'll tell you how. By saying that the one person in your party that actively gave a shit about Muslims and a prime issue for Muslim voters, and telling them, no, we're going to do a complete 180 on that issue. See you in the next election. Biden ain't doing so hot either, because his response to the Israel-Palestine situation has led to a lot of key Muslim voters saying, especially in the key swing state of Michigan, saying that they feel betrayed and that they will never vote for Biden again. Now, I want to make this very, very clear. They are not shifting away to the right. These guys are not shifting to the right. These guys aren't going to vote for Trump. These guys aren't voting for the Tories. What they're doing is saying that they won't vote. I don't know how much in play that would put the UK, but in America that would be a bit troubling, especially in Michigan, where many people say, if Biden doesn't win Michigan, he can't really make up that vote total. Now, there's one thing I really need to point out for those who don't necessarily understand. It's yes, you can criticize Biden for this, you can acknowledge that this is a bad thing, but at the end of the day, let's think about it for 2 seconds. Trump is worse on this issue. Trump actually likes Netanyahu. Think about that when you're making your decision on whether or not you should vote, especially considering issues that you know are going on in the United States. Issues regarding the LGBTQ, and the fact that Trump is literally saying that he would do a fascism if he were to win the presidency. Just think about it before you make up your mind. Speaking of Israel, the U.S. House of Representatives, by the way, they fixed their speakership problem. They elected a white guy for the office. What a shock. But they fixed their problem. And the first thing they decided to do after fixing that problem was to approve a bill for Israel. because of course that would happen. And sure enough, the bill passed with a very large margin. 412 people voted for it. Pretends to be shocked. Now, what is interesting is the 16 people who did not vote yes on this bill. First, we're going to start off with the present votes, because we did get 6 Democrats who voted present on the bill. Now, present on these sort of resolutions are a bit iffy, because if we know anything about present, and I said it in the Vanguard podcast, present votes lower the threshold needed for the bill to pass. So what these guys are doing is they're essentially letting the bill pass, but they're expressing disagreement with the bill in some capacity without explicitly voting no. This is basically just them saying, look, either way I vote on this bill, I am probably going to get flack for it, so I'm just going to vote this way to wash my hands clean of the affair, while not actually trying to stop the bill from being passed. The 6 Democrats in question that voted this way are Joaquin Castro, Nydia Velázquez, 2 people very tertiarily affiliated with progressive politics, but are basically still within the Washington consensus, Washington, neolib talking points. There were some people on Twitter that were taking Velázquez's vote as a positive, because due to the fact that her district is very heavily focused on AIPAC and has a lot of very prominent Jewish constituents, is the fact that she voted present on this is a bit shocking. And Pramila Jayapal voted present. My boy Chuy Garcia voted present. That's actually a little bit of an L. I actually honestly thought that he wouldn't vote present. I thought he might actually vote no, because there were some other Palestine Israel bills that he voted no on that was shocking. This one is probably a lot more aligned with what I actually thought that Chuy would do. And 2 members of the squad, Ayanna Pressley and Greg Casar. Greg is actually a bit interesting, because Greg, as we all know, has been one of the few members of, the only member of the squad that has been actively supportive of Israel. So the fact that he voted present, and another thing that has been showing is that he recently signed on to the idea of having a ceasefire. It's this is beneficial because it shows that he's not 100% within that Washington consensus. He's not a fucking Richie Torres, where it's just I'm a progressive.
Excuse me, sir, I'm a Palestinian child. Do you support progress for me?
Casar actually does care about Palestinians, but he just has it in his head oh, we have to support Israel, blah, blah, blah. It's It's that's better than nothing, but, still. But the 10 people who voted against it are big. First, the lone Republican that voted against it, Thomas Massie. Now, Thomas Massie voting against this is because of 2 things. 1, money, because this bill would give money to Israel, and he wants the government budget to be cut, so that's why he voted nay. But also, there was one thing at the end of it that said that America would stand ready for Israel when they need them, which is basically code for war, and also economic sanctions would be placed on Iran, because Iran is apparently giving money to Hamas. But the 9 Democrats that voted against this bill are a bit more interesting. First, the one shock, Al Green from Texas. I don't know why he, of all people, voted against it, but interesting. Next, we have Andre Carson, who, despite the fact that he's a new Dem and, is kind of cringe on a lot of issues, I have to give major props to Andre Carson, because this is one of the few issues that he's been absolutely great on. I have no clue. Okay, well, scratch that. I know why he is good on this, because he's Muslim. He is Muslim, so he understands, to a degree, the issues regarding the Palestinian people. And of course, the remaining nays are from the squad: Dealey Ramirez, Ilhan Omar, Rashida Tlaib, Summer Lee, Cori Bush, Jamal Bowman, and of course, AOC. Not surprising. Really good. Now, one thing that is interesting, I guess, is that a lot of people are they love Bernie but hate AOC. But what's interesting is the fact that, despite the fact that AOC has been regarded as a sellout, she's been way better on the issue of Palestine than Bernie. Bernie is basically holding a similar position to Greg Casar. It's yeah, they do like to they support Palestinians, just not to the degree of anti-Israelism. Man, anti-Israelism. If only there was a term that meant people who didn't like the state of Israel. Speaking of states, Joe Biden will not appear on the primary ballot in New Hampshire. Very big, interesting thing, because like this is a thing that popped out of nowhere. Because here's the drama. New Hampshire, as we all know, used to be the state that held its primary first. But now, the Democratic Party is trying to change that. And they've made it so that their state calendar will have South Carolina be first. But New Hampshire isn't budging on this. And due to this controversy, Joe Biden has said that he will not run in the New Hampshire primary. And the Democratic Party had a rule. I don't know how long this rule has been in place, but it states that anybody who is running in this primary will not be allowed to receive delegates from the DNC. Now, none of this stuff isn't really that new. Like, we've had sort of debacles and debates like this in the past for the DNC. Like, I think in the 2008 election, one of the states, I think it was Michigan, they had a problem where they couldn't agree on a specific date. And as such, basically every major candidate withdrew from that race. And then the people weren't awarded delegates if they did enter that race. But this one is interesting because of that rule. Like, that is what makes it interesting. It's like anybody who receives, who runs in this primary will not receive delegates by the DNC. Now, that rule is a little vague. Do they mean delegates from this state or delegates in general? Because either way, this makes Marianne Williamson, and that's funny, even a story about Joe Biden, it's immediately Marianne Williamson. This makes Marianne Williamson's strategy the dumbest ever, because Marianne Williamson's whole plan was to win New Hampshire and make it so that New Hampshire would then make Joe Biden not want to run, continue his presidential term. But since that's not going to be an issue, because anybody who runs in the New Hampshire primary won't be awarded delegates from that primary, it's then what's the issue? So again, Marianne Williamson's proving that she's not really gonna do so hot. Speaking of campaigns, an interesting campaign has just launched today that is very interesting. Well, actually, this didn't launch today. This actually launched a couple days ago. Jeff Jackson, who has announced that he will be running for North Carolina Attorney General as opposed to running for re-election in the House because his House seat was gerrymandered away from him. I say good on Jackson. This trajectory really is weird, and it makes sense if, I guess it will make sense when I get into the main topic of this video, but, this trajectory was definitely not in the plan, or maybe it was, but it's just weird. Jeff Jackson ran for Senate, then got a House seat, and now is going to be running for Attorney General, a position that he will more than likely win. At the very least, he'll win the primary. I know that for a fact. He's going to win the primary 100%. But general election, I don't know about that. That's where things can get complicated because he's not the incumbent, so that's going to be an issue. But considering Josh Stein was a relatively popular Attorney General, Jeff Jackson probably has good shoes to fill. I wouldn't be surprised if Jeff Jackson remains in that position, and I don't really have a problem with him. Jeff, he's a blue state random guy. On the national stage, he's awful. I don't really care for him on the national stage, but on a state level, it's dude, this is amazing. Oh, and while I'm at it, I guess I might as well mention, Joe Biden has another primary challenger. House Democrat Dean Phillips has launched a primary bid. His first stint of running for office was ruined by Elon Musk, who deleted his Twitter account. There is really not much else to say. He's just a dude who's trying to scam people out of their money, who thinks that he has a chance at winning. One thing that is interesting is the fact that the guy who used to be in charge of the Lincoln Project, Steve Schmidt, is actually the guy who is pushing for his candidacy. And the funny thing is, he literally is also the same guy who made Sarah Palin a thing. So yeah. With that out of the way, let's move on to the main topic of this video. Conspiracy theory. an explanation for an event or situation that exerts the existence of a conspiracy by a powerful or sinister group, often political in motivation. We've all seen conspiracy theories at some point in our lifetimes. They thrive on people who are skeptical of the folks in charge and official narratives, who then decide to go down a rabbit hole to find out the truth. And at its worst, they can be very detrimental. But at their best, I actually think that conspiracy theories are beneficial, because it is generally good to be skeptical of a lot of things, to ask questions, to not take everything at face value, to look further into things to figure out the truth, which will naturally draw you to conspiracy theories. But if you are to maintain that outlook, then naturally you will grow out of conspiracy theories. Because, and I hate to say this to a lot of people, a lot of conspiracy theories are just flat out bullshit. Especially ones that a lot of people in the general public believe. You know, basically any theory that revolves around the moon landing, 9/11, JFK, all those ones are basically complete bull. If you actually look into any of them critically, there are so many holes that the theories have to fill that they just don't. Despite this, a lot of people believe them, because they generally are attracted to them. And that's sort of like the big thing that kind of divides certain types of conspiracy theories and the type of believers of conspiracy theories. Like I said, like a lot of people who believe in conspiracy theories are naturally skeptical people who are drawn to them. But if they don't grow out of it and they don't maintain that critical thinking, they will end up being basically just occultists. That the conspiracy is right no matter what. And why do they do that? It's because they want to have some sort of belief that ties the world together. Because the world is a very, very, chaotic place where things can just happen. And that's scary to a lot of people. They don't want to believe that some crazy guy from Dallas could just pick up a rifle and shoot the president, and then it just happens. They want to believe that it had to have been something bigger because it makes the world make sense. They don't want to believe that some guy in the Middle East that lived in a cave could plan an attack that could kill thousands of people. They want to believe that it's some big government conspiracy theory because to them it makes sense. It's like, why would something so big be caused by something so small? We have similar sentiments about it to this day. There are people who still legitimately believe that the Las Vegas shooter had some secret motive. I saw a tweet on fucking Twitter where it was literally like some guy said, isn't it weird that 5 years later we have no evidence and no explanation of what happened about the Las Vegas shooting? And it's like, we do have an answer. He was a guy who went insane and shot up a bunch of people. But they don't want to believe that that can happen. They want to blame it on something. Conspiracy theories are like a cult or a religion to a degree. Like the JFK assassination, there are some conspiracy theories that are so large that it's really just a lot of people just actually believe, JFK assassination conspiracy theories. A ton of Americans, a majority of Americans believe in the JFK conspiracy theory. And it doesn't matter what it is. It doesn't matter the truth. It doesn't matter that they have all the information readily available, that they could find out the fact that it wasn't a big conspiracy theory. People who believe that JFK was trying to stop the Federal Reserve from being big and powerful, it doesn't matter that there's literally information right there that says that that wasn't what happened. People still believe that. QAnon's been disproved every single day, and yet people still believe it. Currently at this moment, my mom's down this huge fucking conspiracy rabbit hole. Where, do you guys remember that thing where the phones had the emergency alarm system? By the way, I didn't get an emergency alarm system on my phone. Should I be worried? But anyways, she genuinely believed that it was going to kill a bunch of people because of all the radiation coming out of the phones would interact with people and would make them go crazy. And it would kill them. It would lead to massive death around the world. But even though that was literally disproven, she just moved the goalpost. And now, all of a sudden, she blames the Israel-Palestine crisis going on right now on that. She makes this claim that, the US government is going to stop, printing US dollars, and that the dollar is going to become worthless, and that they're trying to force you to use your credit cards. Even though she goes to stores and goes to places that charge her for using her credit card. i.e. making it cheaper for her to use paper dollars, the thing that she thinks that the government is trying to make her stop using. Because people would rather believe in a lie than believe the truth. Like for me, I base all of the things that I believe in on facts, evidence, research, and don't really buy into a lot of like theories or like stuff. Even in TV shows, I only theorize on things that might happen within the show, and very rarely theorize about things that don't like involve outside things, unless there's enough evidence to convince me otherwise. Like, I mean, all cartoon theories are sort of based on that. They take like one piece of information that is like slightly skewed in one perspective, and then it's like, okay, but ignore like literally everything else that shows that that's not true. Like the fucking Rugrats theory. The Rugrats theory is so bad. It's basically a scary story about the Rugrats, but told as if it's like an actual theory of how the show was made. And it just doesn't make any sense. I mean, I guess I'll say one of the things that it says is like, it basically implies that all of the Rugrats except for Angelica are dead, which can easily be disproven by the fact that they're not dead. But like most other people, I was genuinely drawn into a lot of these. I was drawn into the crazy fan theories about children's shows. I was drawn into conspiracy theories about a lot of other things. Like, I guess I can use this time to explain the theories that I used to believe in. Like, I didn't want to do this because I thought that, it would be a bit tacky, because the whole point of this episode is like theories that I do believe in. But I assume that you all can listen to me and hear that these I don't believe in at all, 100%. Like, I used to believe in them, but I don't anymore. But if this is something that needs to really be addressed, I will just add a section where it's just like these ones I don't believe in. Like, I'll just make it like a subsection of the video. I might just do that anyways. But just to repeat, these ones I don't believe in. These ones I don't believe in. These ones I don't believe in. I used to, but I do not believe in them anymore. Okay, first, obvious ones. Like a majority of people, I at one point believed that 9/11 was something. I didn't know what. But I was drawn a lot into 9/11 conspiracy theory videos. To this day, I don't even genuinely know what I believed 9/11 was. I don't necessarily know if I believed that it was an inside job. But I at the very least believed in the whole thing where it was like, they knew about 9/11 before it happened. But now that I'm older, I understand they knew 9/11 was coming was incredibly vague. And it was just so stupid. JFK conspiracy theories I used to believe in too, because just like everyone else did. Like, I was even so dumb to the point where there was this one video that claimed that JFK was shot point blank in front of everybody and not a single person noticed. And it was because the car driver, the glare of the person, of the car driver, it looked like a gun. So it looked like the driver of the car turned around, shot JFK, and then turned back around. And it's just like, oh, nobody noticed that the driver point blank shoots JFK. Like, what? I was stupid enough to believe that? Also, very early on in this channel, some lefty conspiracy theories I sort of parroted, even if I didn't necessarily understand them 100%. The first one this one I didn't understand at all, really, but I parroted it anyways, because it ties into sort of the same thing of conspiracy theories where it draws you in to people who are questioning of official narratives. And it was the Syria gas attack thing, because it asks the simple question, why would Assad gas his own people? I also used to believe in the Seth Rich conspiracy theory, but that wasn't necessarily my fault. It was because WikiLeaks was basically saying that Seth Rich did it the whole time. That's not my fault. I blame Julian Assange on that one. Speaking of that, there's another conspiracy theory that I used to believe, and that one's a little bit more in a different category, but this one I can officially say is kind of in this category. And it's one, again, a lot of people genuinely believe, but I'll just give a hot take and just say this. As controversial as this may be, I think this one genuinely might shock people that I don't believe in, especially considering I did say that I believed it at one point. Although this is a good transition to talk about ones that I'm a bit agnostic on, but as of now, I'm not necessarily sure about the whole Epstein killing himself thing. Now, as we all know, the whole meme is like, oh, Jeffrey Epstein didn't kill himself. But the problem is that whole thing became like a far-right thing, apparently, where apparently it's like a far-right thing to believe that Jeffrey Epstein didn't kill himself. So, by virtue, it's like, I guess he did. Like, I mean, I wouldn't necessarily be surprised if he did get murdered, but it's like, I mean, the far-right ruined it for me. I'm sorry. Far-right ruins everything. But I guess, again, this is a good transition because this is one that I'm a little bit agnostic on. Like, I'm not necessarily sure how to word it because it's just like, I don't really know. I don't really know what's going on with that one. But there are a couple of other conspiracy theories that I'm a bit agnostic on, where it's like, I don't necessarily believe them, but if they were proven tomorrow, I wouldn't necessarily be shocked or anything. And the first one will go with 2 assassinations. Malcolm X and Martin Luther King. I don't believe in any conspiracy theory regarding like the government being involved in their assassinations or anything of the sort. But like the evidence does seem to point to, you know, the Nation of Islam doing Malcolm X and MLK being shot by James Earl Ray. But again, if information came out tomorrow that disproved that and then showed without a shadow of a doubt that they were killed by, say, the US government or someone else, I wouldn't necessarily be that surprised. And another one that I used to be on one side of wholeheartedly, but now am not necessarily in that side anymore, was the allegations regarding Julian Assange. Because if you don't remember the story, Julian Assange was accused of raping 2 girls. The original story was rough sex, and then it turned into rape allegations. And then those rape allegations were then used by the mainstream media and a lot of foreign governments to try and get Julian Assange out of the Ecuadorian embassy. And of course, being in that realm of like super pro Julian Assange people, naturally, I would rush to his defense and be like, no, he didn't do it. And believe that it was an entire conspiracy theory against him, that these allegations were purely being used to get him out of the embassy, and that it was very suspicious. While I still hold a lot of the suspicions regarding the entire story, it's not necessarily aimed, like, I think the problem was that very early on it seemed aimed at the girls, which I don't think was ever my intention. At least I hope it was never my intention. But it's like, given that I look further into it and seeing Julian Assange's reputation in regards to women, it's not necessarily in the realm of possibility. It's not necessarily out of the realm of possibility that this might have happened. I still maintain that the people didn't really use this case for any sort of altruistic reasons, that they purely pushed for this case to be spread to purely make Julian Assange look bad. But I still don't necessarily believe or disbelieve in the allegations themselves. Anyways, I've deliberated long enough. Let's just get into the actual conspiracy theories that I do believe in. First, we're going to talk about World War I, because as of looking into World War I, I've been looking into World War I for a potential future video and just generally interested in topics. And one of the things that I was always fascinated by was basically like, you know, a lot of lefties talk about like war, like in pacifism. But one of the things that we started thinking about is like, okay, but like how many of the wars that the US participated in how many of them were actually justified in some capacity? And in my view, I have figured out that only 4 wars in the history of the United States can actually be classified as justified, at least from the research that I looked into. Those wars in particular being the Revolutionary War, the War of 1812, the Civil War, and World War II. Every other war being classified as useless, like wars done for bad reasons that should not have been done. And as I've learned a bit more and more about World War I, I've come to the conclusion that World War I is objectively the most useless, ineffective war that the United States, and by extension the world, was a part of. Video on that topic coming next year. But one of the things that I learned while doing this research was about the whole Lusitania situation, because the Lusitania is a thing that is very interesting. Like, for those who don't remember, Lusitania was a ship. I think it was a British ship, but it could have been an American ship. But like, anyways, it was a ship that had Americans on it that was heading to England. It was going from America to England. However, big problem. During that World War, the Germans were pushing for U-boats and submarines and were basically blockading England. The reason why was because England was blockading Germany. So what happened was that Germany sent a letter and published it around the United States, basically saying, like, as soon as the Lusitania left, they're basically like, sorry guys, but if that ship enters British waters, it's going to be blown up. Sorry. And sure enough, what happened? It blew up. But one of the big things that was spread around was like, because the Lusitania was supposed to be a peaceful vessel. It was just a normal ship. It wasn't a military ship. But there were a lot of unanswered questions about the Lusitania. One of the big things was the fact that it was harboring a ton of weapons on board. So if it was a peaceful ship that had no interest in the war whatsoever, why was it being sent with weapons to England? Then there was an interesting quote by Winston Churchill where he basically said that in order for them to win the war, they needed to get the US involved in some capacity. So he was explicitly trying to get the British government to incentivize American tourism to England so that they would be able to get ships into English waters and possibly get shot by U-boats to draw America into the war. And then another thing that was interesting was like, because I knew this prior, where after Lusitania sank, William Jennings Bryan was trying to get America to get more warnings before they traveled on vessels heading for England. But Woodrow Wilson said no, that he didn't want to issue these kinds of warnings, which raised more questions. And then Gerald Nye, in the lead up to World War II, was going through the Nye Committee, where he basically showed details explaining that the military-industrial complex was making massive amounts of profit during World War I, and that they were actively pushing for the war to go on. So, big conspiracy theory number one. World War I was completely useless and was pushed into by a ton of people who were looking to profit and gain favor from it. I mean, on the American side of things, Woodrow Wilson thought that it would be so popular that he would literally get a third term because of it. Conspiracy theory number two. Carlos Salinas Gortari had Luis Donaldo Colosio murdered. I know that it's kind of funny me saying like, oh, JFK, that assassination conspiracy theory is bullshit. But the Luis Donaldo Colosio one, that's legitimate. But I am. From the information that I've seen, it does seem a lot more likely that Gortari had Colosio murdered as opposed to anybody having JFK murdered, particularly due to the fact that murders of like this kind of variety are a lot more common in Mexico and have a lot more ties to other campaigns and people who are looking to make some sort of profit for a political or economic purpose. But it just seems likely considering the situation that ended up happening in the immediate aftermath and the immediate prior. Like, what happened after this happened? Like, after Colosio was murdered, what happened? The burgeoning left candidacy of Cuauhtémoc Cárdenas was tanked due to his association with the Zapatistas. They had ample opportunity to then use that to attack the Zapatistas and push against them. The party would be able to maintain its current neoliberal direction without any need for any social or political change. Like in this particular case, it just seems like too many stars lined up in this situation. I know it's like a bit more like conspiratorial, but it's like whatever. The next one is one that I've heard always, like when I was younger, but I never once pieced together that it was a conspiracy theory until recently. And it's the Reagan put crack cocaine in low-income black neighborhoods conspiracy theory. It's one that we hear a lot in the black community, but it's like Reagan puts like crack cocaine into low-income black neighborhoods that encourages police to become more violent against black people and also makes black people, keeps black people down. Basically, it's an extreme version of the currently systemic racist policies that we have. Well, I guess more of the systemic racist policies of Reagan, but you know. The next conspiracy theory is that there is an element of COINTELPRO still out there. I only say it's conspiracy theory because it's technically not proven, and even though I made a video where I kind of poo-poo the idea that certain things are like COINTELPRO things, but I think there is, to a degree, some element of it out there. Like, whether it be people who are targeting, like, activist organizations, like what was the case when that a person got a person who, like, it was an activist who died not that long ago, and then it was revealed that they were a target of the FBI, to the point where even I made a whole video where I'm like, where it was basically like, you are not that important, where it's like, no, not everybody you believe is an op. It's like, yeah, that is true. Not everybody you believe is an op. But we have to acknowledge that there's at least a couple of ops out there. Like, let's be real. There's a couple of ops out there, like a couple of Twitter accounts that are clearly, obviously ops. And I'm actually going to get into one of them in a bit now. Bear with me. But we'll have to get into a couple of others first. But I do believe that there is some element of COINTELPRO still out there. The next theory. A lot of history is skewed to spread some sort of narrative. That one isn't necessarily that much of a conspiracy theory. You know, a lot of people already acknowledge this. History is written by the victors. But here's some examples that I think you'll, like, understand what I'm talking about. Like, leaving out certain pieces of information out, even though they are relevant to the story, just because it doesn't necessarily fit into the narratives of the school. For starters, here's one. Here's one that I remember distinctly when I was, like, younger. And it was about the 1912 election. Here's what I was taught about the 1912 election in school. And it was interesting because I had independent research. I had done independent research about the topic beforehand or, like, around the same time period. But anyways, like, they taught you about, Teddy Roosevelt and William Howard Taft, they split the Republican vote, and that caused Woodrow Wilson to win. That Teddy Roosevelt left and formed a third party about, to do whatever, to push for his presidential ambitions. But they conveniently left out the part where they mention that Teddy Roosevelt got second place. They conveniently leave that part out. They tell you the part, Teddy Roosevelt and William Howard Taft, the vote was split, and due to that, Woodrow Wilson won. They left in just enough information for you to come to the conclusion Teddy Roosevelt caused Taft to lose. Then they'll teach you all about Ross Perot, and then they'll teach you about, Ralph Nader, other so-called spoilers, who conveniently got third place. So that leads you to think, Teddy Roosevelt, it fills in the blank, Teddy Roosevelt got third place too. Because if he didn't, they tell me. But a more common example is whitewashing socialist figures. You can get a ton of books about Helen Keller. Very few of them are going to mention her socialist activism. In fact, they whitewashed the history of Helen Keller so bad that a lot of people in my generation, my generation and lower, genuinely don't believe Helen Keller was a real person. And that's genuinely depressing. I saw a video where it basically explains, all the reasons why people think Helen Keller isn't real, and then go over, how just so depressing it is. I guess I'll say one of them, because one of the things that they say is, the reason why they don't believe that Helen Keller is, real is because her eyes are too good looking for a blind person. They're like, she's looking straight forward. Her eyes are beautiful. I don't see her wearing those black glasses, so clearly she must be not real. She could have been a person faking her blindness. Now, if you are stupid enough to actually start thinking, those aren't her eyes. They're glass eyes. She was so self-conscious about how her eyes looked, she had her eyes removed from her head and put glass eyes in there to make herself more visually appealing. If you legitimately don't believe Helen Keller is a real person, unsubscribe now. I don't care. Legitimately go fuck off if you're gonna even entertain that bullshit. But the biggest figure in history that is a socialist that we whitewash a lot is Martin Luther King Jr., conveniently leaving the part out where he expresses views that are not necessarily as good as racism bad. That apparently my fucking school gives the extra knowledge of, by the way, he was a hypocrite because he smoked. The next one is one that I didn't even, this is kind of funny. I said this, and then I put it in the Discord server, if you want to join, information's there. But, I put it in the Discord server because I teased about this idea, and, I I heard, like, when we talked about it, it was like, some people were like, this one's genuinely interesting, and I didn't think about it that way. And that's the exact same idea I had, because I didn't believe this until, like, a week ago, literally, or, like, 2 weeks ago. Like, coincidentally, like, when I was, like, writing the script for, like, this, I actually saw a tweet that said, like, what are some conspiracy theories you believe in? I just read some of the comments, and I read some of the quote tweets, and I saw this, and I was like, holy shit, this actually makes too much sense for me to not believe this. Okay, so remember the Satanic Panic? So the conspiracy theory is that the Satanic Panic was completely made up in order to discredit public schools. Because if you notice, a lot of the problems with the Satanic Panic stuff was that a lot of it was like school clubs or things that were going on school grounds. So the theory goes that religious zealots or the media intentionally lied about the Satanic Panic, or like built up this like fake drama about the Satanic Panic in order to try and make it more likely that people would do private schools or homeschooling. And that makes sense because we get this sort of thing almost every 5 years. Like basically every year since like 2016, we've gotten a new thing to try and discredit public schools. Like you notice all the same things, cultural Marxism or critical race theory or like sex education. Like all of those things, they tie back to homeschooling or like private schooling. All the way back from Brown v. Board of Education, there has always been this huge thing to try and discredit public schools. And the theory goes that Satanic Panic was basically just one of them. Okay, so the next one is energy industry silences clean energy sources. Like, I've seen this a lot too, where it's like there's one famous one where it's like in The Simpsons, where it's like this guy, like Hans Moleman, he like makes solar energy, and then it's just like, wow, do you actually believe this works? He's like, yes, I do. And then it's like, they're the coal industry, and they like beat him up and then kill him. And then they reveal like, oh no, like fossil fuels are the way of the future. And the theory goes that, as it says, the energy industry silences clean energy sources. Now, I'll admit that the first one that I saw that made me believe this, I actually have gone back on. Like, there was this one guy who claimed that he had a water-fueled car, and then he died like immediately after pitching the story to the guys. And he made the claim right before he died, like, oh, they poisoned me. But in actuality, it was like he died of like a brain aneurysm. Like, I don't necessarily buy into that kind of stuff, but I do believe like there is, to an extent, some truth that like current energy sources like hide all like, or like use money to try and push against clean energy sources. And we know this for a fact to a degree. Like coal companies give money to politicians to not have them push for clean energy sources and stuff with the Green New Deal. And it's been a proven fact that a lot of the anti-nuclear stuff that has been spread was actually done by the coal industry. Like, not only did they spread their own stuff about nuclear energy, but they also hyped up like legitimate concerns of nuclear energy, specifically so that nuclear energy would be seen as like an extremely dangerous form of energy. That way they can protect their bottom buck. And we do have evidence of like industries similar to like this doing stuff like in the past, like, you know, the tobacco industry pushing against marijuana research because that would make it so that, or like cancer research into like the connections between cigarettes and cancer. Like, a lot of this stuff has happened before, so it's basically like, this seems likely, but I don't have a specific like a thing for it. Okay, so the next one is a COVID theory, but don't worry, this isn't the ones that you think it is. So basically this theory is that our COVID policy in the United States was dictated by capitalist interest, which, but where's the theory? But to a degree that is considered a conspiracy theory, so I'm going to include it. Like, I'm not saying that it completely dictated our like COVID policies, but I will admit that there is some degree of the COVID policies where it's like, we never really would go far enough because capitalist interests wouldn't let us. We couldn't do a complete shutdown or a complete mask mandate because big businesses didn't want that. There was like one specific example where it's like, where it was like Hassan did a thing. I covered it in the Hassan episode, but it was like where Hassan covered that there was like one day a top agent, not top agent, but like a top person from a company said like, hey, it would be cool if this happened. And then like the following week or the following day, the US government implemented a COVID policy that loosened a restriction specifically that would benefit that interest. Now, I don't know if necessarily all of it is that blatant, but in that particular case it was. So It's like something that is there, something that has happened, unfortunately. And that's the only thing regarding COVID that I would genuinely believe. No microchips, no myocarditis. The next conspiracy theory. The media hypes up stuff to suit ratings, skew narratives, and distract people. Again, what's the story? What's this theory? And that's one thing that you will learn. Like, as I said before, I genuinely choose to believe things. Well, I don't choose to believe things, but I accept information that I accept information and then base my viewpoints based on information and data. And as such, most of the conspiracy theories that I believe in are stuff that are just pretty much confirmed. But some examples of what I mean is of course, Satanic Panic, where, the devil's music and stuff like the Dungeons and Dragons bullshit, like Pokemon. Remember in the 90s where some evangelicals and some people in the media were spreading that Pokemon were a dangerous thing? Video games cause violence is a big one. Drugs, basically anything regarding drugs is considered this big thing. There are drugs in candy, the Blue Star Tattoo legend, strawberry quick meth. I'm being serious. And we get this sort of thing all the time. I remember almost every day when I was in school, Mom would tell me I don't accept candy from people because they're secretly going around spreading meth in candy. And it's who is they and why are they spreading meth in candy? As most people point out, drugs aren't cheap. They're not giving it away for free. If they're giving it away for free, they're not going to hide what it is. They're going to explicitly tell you what it is, and they're going to explicitly say, we're giving this to you for free, and the next one will cost you. There are a bunch of internet things that spread around every so often, like the Momo curse, where people thought that at the end of certain videos, a scary picture of this Momo character telling people to kill themselves would be there. There was the Blue Whale game, where some people were spreading around that there was this big internet trend where, people were, encouraging each other to commit suicide. It's the media consistently spreads around a narrative that crime is really high, even though statistically is at its lowest point. The next rounds of conspiracy theories are all basically revolving around electoral politics. Okay, so first, there's the conspiracy theory that Dems and GOP screw candidates in primaries that they don't like. Again, not that much of a conspiracy theory. Some examples include Dennis Kucinich and Brad Miller in 2012, Marie Newman and Andy Levin in 2020. Again, not really that much of a conspiracy theory, but there is some elements of it because some people like to claim that it's this is just it's just luck of the draw. But it's just are you sure it's the luck of the draw? Are you sure that this wasn't deliberate? You specifically target two left of center members of Congress. That's a bit interesting. This one's similar to that one, but it's a bit more conspiratorial and a little less proven. But I did bring some compelling examples. Okay, so the Democratic Party encourages people to run/not run in order to give them political favor. This isn't something direct as drawing Dennis Kucinich in a constituency that doesn't favor him or whatever. But this is basically this is a bit step further, where it's they actively encourage specific people to run in specific areas in order to specifically hurt or help another candidate. The least likely person in this thing that is relative to that is Jeff Jackson. Jeff Jackson was discouraged from running for Senate in 2020, then decided to run for Senate in 2022. But since he didn't fit into their interests, they decided to push him out of the race and basically give Cherry Beasley the one. But as a consolation for stepping out, they draw him a congressional district that is favored for him. So he runs in that one and basically becomes a normie Democrat. But these two are the ones that are very explicit in that regard. First one, ᵘᵃ Thanedar. In 2018, ᵘᵃ Thanedar ran a primary bid against Gretchen Whitmer and Abdul El-Sayed, and ᵘᵃ Thanedar basically ran in the same crowd that Abdul El-Sayed was running in, minority progressives, to the point where there are many people who were legitimately saying that Abdul El-Sayed or ᵘᵃ Thanedar would be good candidates in the race. And sure enough, what ended up happening is Whitmer ended up winning that primary. And coincidentally, next election cycle, ᵘᵃ Thanedar gets to be a member of the Michigan State Senate, or State House. And then he ends up running for the actual House seat, Now that one, I don't necessarily know if that was part of the plan, because that one was just caused by a bunch of, like, members of the Democratic Party being stupid. But the one that I think legitimately made me convinced of this strategy was Mondaire Jones. Because here's my theory, because here's the part that is true. Mondaire Jones was drawn to be in an area that would be uncomfortable for him to win, where he would either have to run against one of the heads of the Democratic Party, Sean Patrick Maloney, or run against a ally of his in Congress, whether it be Jamal Bowman or Richie Torres. And it was very obvious that they were telling him to run against Jamal Bowman. Like, many people were just openly telling him, run against Jamal Bowman, run against Jamal Bowman, run against Jamal Bowman, but he wouldn't run against Jamal Bowman. What he ended up deciding to do instead was running in the open house seats of New York District 10, which many people were like, that's a stupid idea. Mondaire Jones can't win in that area. He doesn't live there, and there are a lot of other prominent candidates in the race. But wait a second. What if we were going about it wrong? What if Mondaire Jones wasn't running to win? I mean, we assumed that he was running to win, because that's what most people do when they run for office. They want to win. But what if Mondaire Jones was told to run in that district to hurt the chances of ᵖᵦᵃⁿ? I mean, let's think about it. In that race, he ended up getting the endorsement of the Working Families Party. Like, he basically got the Working Families Party ballot line without really even trying, because he already got the Working Families Party ballot line, and then he moved to the seat. So technically, it was like to stop a chance of her getting the nomination of the Working Families Party, but that didn't end up working. So what ended up happening is, like, he runs in that district, he splits the left vote with her and another one, Caroline Rivera. And then, as a consolation, as a thank you for doing so, whenever a new seat opens up, Mondaire Jones gets the chance to run. And sure enough, New York District 17, as of now, Mondaire Jones is the only prominent candidate in the race. There is another candidate in the race that is technically prominent, but most, if not all, of the people in that area have agreed Mondaire Jones is the guy. And as a consolation to them, Mondaire Jones is trying to distance himself from the left flank, to the point where he is even saying that he probably won't even back Jamal Bowman, because unintentionally, thanks to Jamal, he was out of a seat. Next theory is that I believe there is some truth to the Dem self-sabotage theory. Now, there's some points to it that I don't agree with. Like, there's some people that want to go so far as to say that Democrats intentionally try to lose elections so that they don't have to do any work. That's just fantasy, really. Or they go so far as to say that the Democrats intentionally have it so that somebody switches, that they have the rotating moderate. Like, if it wasn't Kyrsten Sinema and Joe Manchin, it would be Tim Kaine and Bob Casey. When it's not necessarily true, because if you look at the voting records of those guys, you realize that those guys are a lot more, like, favorable to the Democratic Party as opposed to Sinema and Manchin. But I think there is some truth to the theory that the Democrats, to a degree, self-sabotage themselves. Whether it be intentionally or not, that's up to interpretation, but it's just there is some small level of truth in that regard. The next conspiracy theory is about MAGA communists. Remember how I said that I believed that there was some truth to the COINTELPRO? Yeah, I legitimately believe that MAGA communists are some sort of AstroTurf campaign that was started by either the FBI, CIA, or whatever else. Like, those things that they keep saying that, like, Vosh and everyone else is doing. I think genuinely, MAGA communists are the AstroTurf campaign that were created to turn unstable communists into fascists. And it's one of the big things that many people don't realize about COINTELPRO and other sort of strategies like this. Because a lot of people want to say, like, Vosh is that, or Keffels is that, or Dylan Burns is that, or Destiny is that. But it's like, no, you don't understand how this works. They don't fund the moderates. They don't fund the people who are sane and rational. Not to say that all of them are, but, like, they don't fund the people like that. Like, when the FBI was sending money to the Black Panther Party to try and dismember, to ruin their party, they weren't giving money to the members of the Black Panther Party that were saying, hey guys, we should vote for the Democrats to make sure the far-right fascist GOP is stopped. They weren't giving money to those people. They were giving money to the people who were saying, like, kill all white people. Those were the people they were giving the money to. And I think MAGA communists are just like that, except their AstroTurf campaign's a little different. Because here's my theory. My theory is that these types of unstable communists, they would have turned into like a fucking new Lee Harvey Oswald. That's what these guys would have turned into. And they understand that that is a bit dangerous for people in charge. So they instead decided to change these guys into far-right people, so that way it will not hurt the actual people in charge. Okay, so this next theory is like one that is not really related to politics at all, but I think genuinely is just one that's just like, it's so massive and so big that I just can't not talk about this. And it's ᵖʰᵦ. For those who don't know what ᵖʰᵦ is, brief tangent for ᵖʰᵦ, but ᵖʰᵦ is videos that were spread on YouTube from like 2015, 2016 to like early 2017, I think, where it was like videos that were made with Elsa, Spider-Man, or other prominent characters like Mickey Mouse or whatever on the YouTube Kids app in particular, of many different varieties: CG, claymation, flash animation, people in costumes. It was just genuinely just like this huge amount of content. And it was coming from tons of different channels from all around the world. They were getting billions of views. And it was basically just trash TV on YouTube. Like basic baby shit that would get people's attention. You know, sometimes it would be from content farms. Sometimes it would be from channels that were trying to emulate the content farms. But it was like just a ton of shit just like that. But then there was some weird things, because sometimes, like most of the time, it was just random, boring bullshit nonsense. But then there's one small step further, because a lot of these videos dealt with really weird topics. Topics that were not really appropriate to be on YouTube, let alone YouTube Kids. Topics that had a very weird sexual nature regarding them. A lot of videos regarding pregnancy, feet, eating feces, pee, humiliation, also involving weird stuff like gore, blades, like syringes. And again, this wasn't just like one channel doing this. This was hundreds, if not thousands of channels doing this, with millions of videos out there. And this kind of stuff just kept spreading all over YouTube. And then in like 2017, when a lot of big prominent channels were bringing this to YouTube's attention, all of a sudden, a lot of these channels just disappeared. And to this day, we don't really know much about what happened. We don't know a lot of the channels that made these kinds of videos. We don't really understand we don't understand a lot of the questions that come from this. And that's led to a lot of people to try and fill in the gaps about what they know. Like, they're like, we know this stuff happened. We don't know why or whatever. And this also stems from a lot of other things that happened on YouTube, all of which sort of delving into this sort of creepy mentality. Like, there was a brief period of time on YouTube. I don't know how brief it was or how long it was, but it was like this like trend on YouTube where it was like, again, it was like similar to this, where it was randomly discovered that there were these guys that were making YouTube playlists that were filled with videos that were made by literal children on YouTube with like weird like titles for the playlist. And then when you would go in the comment section, it would look like random gibberish, but then you would take that gibberish, put it in the search bar, click enter, and then it would take you to a very, very NSFW website that contained illegal material. Not gonna say what it is, but you can probably fill in the gaps. And this was just this big trend on YouTube that nobody noticed until like 2018 or 2019, which just tried to lead people to try to think of like what these ᵖʰᵦ videos were. Which has led to a really big conspiracy theory that these videos were created by some like big prominent pedophile or like a pedophilia ring intentionally trying to groom children for their nefarious purposes. And the one video, like I saw a video that kind of explained this theory, and they mentioned one thing that really made me go like, that actually makes sense. And it was the fact that one of the genres in this, like, not only did the fact that this was very big and very prominent, and like, it just seemed too big and too coordinated and too like massive to be small enough to like be like an accident or anything of the sort. It could be, but it's like, it just seems too big to be an accident. But one specific part that made me think was because one of the pieces of content, like a lot of the content that is made for this sort of content farm type thing, is very easy to make. Flash videos are not that hard to make if you know how to do Flash. Filming yourself in stupid costumes isn't that hard to do. Getting a stupid SFM file is not really that hard to do. Source movie filmmaker, like, you can just make that easily. But there's one particular genre that is very difficult and time consuming to do. Claymation, which was one of the primary ways that this video format would be spread. There would be many claymation videos where it would show this kind of material. And that seems like too big of a thing to really, like, that's too much of a time-consuming form of entertainment to really be like a spur-of-the-moment thing or like content farm. Again, it could be. There's nothing really saying that it can't be that, but it just seems a little too unlikely. And the last conspiracy theory that I believe in is one that I've said I believed in before, but I genuinely do believe this. I've always believed this, and I think I'll continue to believe this because I really don't see any reason why this wouldn't be true. The theory in question is that I believe that the government of the United States or whoever else invents conspiracy theories. Now, why do they do that? Simply put, there are many reasons why they could do that. Diverting attention away from something, to distract people, to quell dissent, and to just generally trick people. Let's take a couple of examples. Like, let's start with this one, 9/11. There are some people who believed that the United States government was trying to use the invasion of Iraq to make it so that we were trying to find the Stargate from a movie. Like, literally, they're like, that Saddam Hussein had access to a Stargate from a science fiction movie, and that in all reality, that was why we were going into Iraq. It wasn't due to 9/11, it wasn't due to anything else. I don't necessarily know how prominent this conspiracy theory was, but I remember seeing it a couple of places, and seeing it in like a Watch Mojo video, so it must be true. So, another conspiracy theory about 9/11 is like, oh, Israel did it. And they did it because they wanted to get the gold underneath the World Trade Center, even though there's no gold underneath the World Trade Center. Let's do another one about 9/11, shall we? The conspiracy theory that, in actuality, the Bush government is the one who did 9/11. Another one about 9/11. Building 7 was a controlled demolition. Here's another one about 9/11. There were no planes. It was all missiles. Why am I keep bringing up 9/11 conspiracy theories? Because when you hear all of those things be spread by people, now all of a sudden, when someone says the US government isn't invading Afghanistan or Iraq because of any sort of incident regarding 9/11, in actuality, they're doing it to advance their geopolitical interests, and they're doing it to try and get oil from Iraq. All of a sudden, that, even though that is blatantly true and what happened, when you hear it next to all those other things, all of a sudden, that sounds just like another kind of crazy conspiracy theory. Because those other people are saying that the US government is lying, and so is this person. That is so that they can make actual dissent against something to be nothing. If you criticize foreign policy about 9/11, you're just one of those crazy conspiracy nuts. And/or that pushes you into the arms of those crazy conspiracy nuts. One that I dedicated a whole video about is that the CIA intentionally lies about UFOs to basically distract people from basically anything else that's going on in the era. You can watch the full video yourself on the channel, but I'm going to mention this fact. We have an election coming up in 2024, and so too does Mexico. And we have some very big foreign policy issues going on at the moment involving Ukraine and Israel. But during that time period, we also randomly got a drop saying, oh yeah, by the way, aliens are real. Here's some declassified things showing a UFO. Ooh, big, scary, ooh. Or, oh hey, look, Mexico's doing this funny thing where they show real-life alien corpses. Isn't that weird? It's so weird. Isn't it pretty coincidental that during all these other big things, all of a sudden this thing that is just randomly drops out of nowhere? And they give you just enough to keep you going, but not enough to actually confirm the theory. Like, oh look, a circle is in a video. Ooh. Oh look, an easily fakeable dead corpse of an alien. Ooh. Oh yeah, and coincidentally, when the CIA has all these documents that are leaked, oh, coincidentally, look, guys, look, Roswell incidents. Wasn't that weird? But the last reason why they do this that I think is interesting is just because it's like, if they can lie to you about this big thing, then what's to stop them from doing some teeny tiny white lies here and there? Like, for example, if the U.S. government is able to convince a certain amount of the population, like, I don't even necessarily have proof that this is like a government astroturf, but it's just like people are now legitimately at the belief that there are some people out there who genuinely believe that the earth is flat. Like, genuinely. I honestly can't believe in any scenario where people are stupid enough to believe that the earth is flat in the year 2023. But that is true. But what if the reason why they believe that is because the government is spreading this false information through the internet? That way they can, if you can legitimately convince somebody in the year 2023 that the earth is flat, then you are genuinely able to convince them of anything. What's to stop you from saying like a small, tiny white lie here and there? So yeah, those are all the conspiracy theories that I believe in. Do you believe in any of these conspiracy theories? Or do you believe in anything stupider than this? Leave your thoughts in the comment section below. Thanks for watching this video. Be sure to like, comment, share, subscribe, and click the bell to notify when a future video of mine comes out. And if you're interested in more content from me, you can go to my website, follow me on Twitter, join my Discord, or consider supporting me on Patreon.